Welcome to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Podcast Studios in Rochester, New York. Mouth off at RockVox. RockVox.com. Having enjoyed a 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of The Helping Conversation, your host, executive and recovery coach, Keith Greer.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for making the time to sit in with us today for this episode of The Helping Conversation. I would imagine most of you have read about, or at least heard about, some of the dire statistics in the world of substance use disorder, and especially opioid use disorder, in terms of overdoses. And one of the silver linings, I guess we could say, from that is that has forced those of us who work in the world of substance use disorder treatment and recovery to sit down and rethink some of how we have historically gone about treating this disease. If you listen to this podcast, you have heard me rail on before about one of the difficulties in our field being that we have for generations been stuck with a very narrow definition of what our whole industry has been willing to call recovery, which has been some combination of inpatient, outpatient treatment, 12-step adherence, and total abstinence. That this has been the definition of recovery. And our field has been guilty for many years of not inviting people in our doors if they are not willing to adhere to that narrow definition. And yet we know that those that are struggling with all different types of substance use disorder have many moments in their lives when they have clarity about wanting to do something to move their life forward, but might not be at a point yet where they are ready to consider abstinence, or might not even think abstinence is something they really need. Those folks have been left on the outside. They have not been welcome into the treatment world for many, many, many years. And again, one of the outcomes, sadly, of all of the deaths that have occurred due to opioid overdoses is there is a chorus that is becoming louder and louder around this concept of harm reduction. How do we not worry about abstinence, but worry about, as the name says, reducing harm? That's kind of one part of it. But then the other part of it that is of equal importance, maybe even more importance, is that we go about working with folks and we listen to what they want. And we stop believing that we are the experts and we get to tell people what recovery should be for them. So today we're gonna really dig into this topic and this conversation with somebody who is really, really, really leading the way nationally in this conversation around harm reduction. So let me give you just a really quick definition. Harm reduction incorporates a spectrum of strategies that include safer use, managed use, abstinence if people want it, meeting people who use drugs where they are at, and addressing conditions of use along with the use itself. Because harm reduction demands that interventions and policies designed to serve people who use drugs reflect specific individual and community needs, there is no universal definition of or formula for implementing harm reduction. However, the National Harm Reduction Coalition considers the following principles central to harm reduction practices. And there's a bunch of them. I'm not going to read them all, just going to give you a couple of them. Some of those principles include accepts for better or worse that licit and illicit drug use is part of our world and chooses to work to minimize its harmful effects rather than simply ignore or condemn them. Understands drug use as a complex, multifaceted phenomenon that encompasses a continuum of behaviors from severe use to total abstinence, and acknowledges that some ways of using drugs are clearly safer than others. And a third one would be it establishes quality of individual and community life and well-being, not necessarily cessation of all drug use, as the criteria for successful interventions and policies. Now, Before you all think that this is a radically new conversation and a radically new concept, let me read something to you from a research article. The Public Health Working Group strongly recommends that the goal be shifted toward a greater balance of harm reduction and use reduction policies. And they go on to say, the principal goal of drug policy should instead be to reduce the harms to society arising from the production, consumption, and control of drugs. Total harm to users and the rest of society can be expressed as a product of total use and the average harm per unit of use, and thus can be lowered by reducing either component. Attention has been focused on the first. Greater attention to the second would be beneficial. Based on experience since 1985, the rhetorical and policy-oriented emphasis on making drug use less acceptable and drugs less available, as well as the focus on drug prevalence as the dominant indicator of program success, has probably outlived its usefulness. That is a quote from a research article from 1996. So this is not a new concept. And the article's author was a gentleman by the name of Alan Marlatt, who is a very well-known and very well-respected researcher in the world of substance use disorder. So this is not new. So let me jump in and introduce our guest today, and we will dig into this topic. Meghan Hetfield is been a devoted advocate for recovery, harm reduction, drug policy reform, and social justice. Meghan regularly lends her voice to organizations that share the same goal and principles of ending the racist war on drugs and treating substance use disorder as a health issue, not a criminal one. As a nationally certified peer recovery support specialist, addiction recovery coach, and a certified recovery peer advocate, she has extensive experience meeting people where they are at in their various stages of substance use and recovery. This work includes harm reduction, syringe exchange, hospitals, jails, high schools, middle schools, colleges, outpatient clinics, MAT programs, local governments, digital platforms, and more. As a trainer, consultant, and subject matter expert, Meghan travels nationally to bring dynamic training to communities and professionals with an emphasis on harm reduction and peer support. As a public speaker, Meghan has had the opportunity to present at events with many local and national organizations, such as the Department of Justice, the Office of Women's Health, SAMHSA, the Culinary Institute of America, the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Support, the New York Department of Health, Columbia University, and Center for Optimal Living. She currently works for We Connect Health Management, where she supports people's goals using contingency management, digital peer-led support groups, and recovery planning. Meghan is a licensed medicinal edible mushroom forager and loves to connect people with wild spaces and the healing that can be found there through guided foraging walks and peer-led groups. She spends most of her free time exploring the Catskill Mountains, foraging for edible medicinal herbs and fungi, and spreading the message of radical compassion through harm reduction. Please join me in welcoming to the Helping Conversation, Meghan Hetfield. Meghan, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Thank you so much for that really amazing introduction. As I'm hearing you read all those things, I'm like, is he talking about me?
I have the exact same experience when I'm introduced. I always think, man, my mother would love to hear this. Like that's what I think when people say all those nice things. But look, it's true. You have been out there and you have been leading the conversation around this topic. And as you and I have talked, not an easy conversation for some folks. There's some pretty significant pushback.
Yeah, one of my favorite harm reduction shirts I have says, harm reductionists have the courage to be disliked. And that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, which is, it is both fascinating to me, and I guess if I sit and give myself a few minutes to think about it, it shouldn't be, because as I mentioned, we have a system that has operated in a pretty rigid, narrow way for a really long time, like generations. And we know that systemic change, societal change can be glacial, but it's incredibly painful to watch how slow it can go. So again, just thank you for being a part of this conversation. So back to your bio. Give us a little bit of your own thumbnail sketch and history of how you got to where you are right now doing this kind of work.
Sure. I overall was like a really sad kid with a lot of mental health issues, a lot of, low self-esteem, self-loathing, some trauma, PTSD, just a recipe for someone who was super vulnerable to substance use and then problematic substance use. And that was my journey. When I found substances, I often tell people that they literally saved my life. I hated myself and, had suicidal ideation and all that. And I found a way to kind of quiet that and make that go away. Only problem is every time I tried to get help or was willing to receive help, the focus was only on the substances. It was only on my substance use. It was only on this narrative of, telling an 18-year-old kid, you're an addict, you have a disease, there is no cure. And because of this, you can't do drugs or drink alcohol for the rest of your life. And the only way to achieve this is to go to these, mutual aid support meetings in a church basement that mentions, God and spirituality and all these things that 18-year-old me wanted nothing to do with. I always say that if you could go back in time and ask the 18-year-old me, like if I literally wanted to try anything else other than that, and I would have said yes, but there was no other thing offered. That was the thing that was offered. And I hadn't even had a legal drink yet at 18. So, the whole thing just wasn't appealing. And that whole, tough love, motivation by threats kind of thing just didn't fly with me. And it doesn't fly with most people that have this like self-loathing, kind of low self-esteem, that are just not prepared to kind of like rally and pull up their bootstraps. They just want to give up is the point. Right. So after many, many attempts at getting help and only being met with that type of help, literally no one ever asking me like, well, why do you use these substances? What do they do for you? How do you feel about this? What are your goals? No one ever asking me any of those things. It kind of just like ground me further into the ground, and things just got, worse and worse as a young adult. Things really spun out of control. Later in life, in my late 20s, I was like approaching 30. I was, facing some consequences in the form of, criminal justice involvement, and things were really not going my way. And at that time, I think, I had the motivation, I had the sort of, wisdom of age happening. And I was able to kind of, get some stability, sort of change my relationship with substances and allow myself some time to do some like inner work and get some mental health support, and finally have some professionals in my life that were able to help me holistically with some of my medical issues along with my mental health. We treat everything like little bubbles separate from each other and not like the whole person. And in that journey, I found stable employment. I was doing, pretty well and learning more about my interest in nature and being outside. And then I started, experiencing the deaths of all these young, healthy people just constantly. I was losing friends, old friends, new friends, people I was in treatment with, people in the mutual aid meetings I was going to. And I just couldn't help but think there was more I could do than sit in a meeting and wait for someone to come ask me to be their sponsor. I just started feeling really helpless and really angry, about all these people dying a preventable death. And it was then that I went and took the Recovery Coach Academy, which you are also a dynamic trainer of this amazing curriculum. And it was in that training on the first day when I heard you're in recovery when you say you are. And it turned my whole world upside down. Yeah. I was really upset about it. I felt attacked. I felt personally like, I had suffered for no reason, that there was this really pragmatic, compassionate, soft, easy, evidence-based way to give and receive help around people's substance use and mental health. And I had never heard about it, even though I had had many attempts at getting professional help. I mean, I'm talking about 3, 4, 5, 6, inpatients and dozens of detoxes and private, addiction coaches and all this stuff. And no one ever met me with like, hey, so what are your goals? And that whole concept just blew my mind. I after I finished being angry and like, selfishly like upset about it, I realized like, all right, let's do this. This is the thing, this is what I can do. This is how I can help. This is how I can show up for my community that's being decimated by this preventable thing. Yeah. And I just hit the ground running and just got some really unique opportunities, to get on the peer support, to get in on the whole peer support movement in New York State. And it's just been bananas since then, watching this movement grow and getting to, talk about my experience and how harmful like shame and stigma can be, and how many doors open when you meet someone with the opposite thing.
That's it. You mentioned Recovery Coach Academy, and that moment on that first day when everyone is introduced to this concept, you're in recovery when you say you are, and the commotion and the emotion in the room. And one of the coolest things about doing that training for me has been the number of people in the room, because as you know, the majority of the people in the room are identify as being in their own recovery. The number of people in the room, and this is both sad but inspiring, who walk out of that training and have said, I wished the helping people I would have worked with would have come at me with this mindset, with this concept. I might have found recovery as I define it maybe a little bit sooner than I did. And that's so powerful to hear that. And to know yet that you and I could walk out today into the current treatment environment, and that's where you get some of your biggest pushback about this concept.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've had this experience too. Some of our best allies in advocacy and education around harm reduction are these moms who have lost children. Yeah. When they learn these concepts, they are moved and they are angry. Yes. I mean, they are angry. They are moms on a mission to like shake the trees and try to understand why nobody offered this to their child. Yeah. And my heart breaks for them. And at the same time, I'm so grateful to have them, next to me when we're talking to our elected officials and trying to change the culture of these treatment centers and trying to just like, it's these folks that are clinging like I was on that first day, like clinging to the life raft that saved them. Yes. And thinking that it's the only life raft that's going to save anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. And if there's another, and the other thing I often feel and hear in the training is, if there's another life raft, are you saying my life raft was wrong? Right. And so we always talk about, oh boy, please, whatever your pathway was, please be passionate about it. You should. I just say, I sometimes can get obnoxious about this. There's just not any evidence on the face of the earth or anywhere in the universe that your pathway is the right pathway for anybody else. So, can we own that? Sure. So before we get into, I really do want to get into, your expertise around harm reduction and some of the concepts and conversations that are going on out there. But I always love starting where you started. So if I knew you when you were a kid, teenager, and you shared that, there were some challenges going on for you at that time in your life. But if I knew you then, what would I have seen or experienced with you that maybe was an indication that you were eventually going to be someone in the helping world?
Yeah. So before I jumped on with you, I was out with my dog, walking. I live in a beautiful area. I'm so fortunate to be able to like drive in my car 4 minutes and just be next to a beautiful creek. I have so many outdoor hobbies. One of them is like looking for these fossils that I just can't believe are here, just washing up, from like 300 million years ago. And, my dog walks around while I like, mess around by the water, just looking at rocks and mushrooms. And I think that spirit was also in that little kid. I was an only child most of my life. I had a sister when I was 12. But before that, I spent a lot of time, by myself, getting really excited about sort of the wonder and the mystery and the, all the magic happening outside in nature. And I loved sharing that with other people. It was like, I got really excited. I had this like big energy, talking to other adults and kids about all the things I was learning, about nature and animals and rocks and archaeology. And I think that is the spirit that allows me to help people, is that energy. It's that excitement, enthusiasm. Like, I found this thing. It's really cool. Do you want to hear about it? So I think that's kind of like my, we talk about the art and science of recovery coaching. And I think that's my art, is I just get really curious and excited. And I want everybody to know about the shiny thing I found.
Passion, right? That's passion. It's passion, and passion speaks to people. I definitely believe that. As you have come up through your career, maybe a couple of people who have been mentors, inspirations that along your pathway in doing the work that you do.
Yeah, I can't, have a conversation about mentors without mentioning Lori Quinn, who was a dear friend of mine that recently passed suddenly of, natural causes. But she was just like the embodiment of the principles of harm reduction. She practiced radical love and radical compassion, with everyone, from the people she was training to become hopefully harm reductionists, or at least, people that were, willing to ask someone what they wanted instead of telling them, what they wanted for themselves. But where she really shined was with other parents, with just like teaching other parents, moms, dads, anyone in a parenting role, how to meet people where they're at and what that really looks like. And it's hard. It's not easy. And she was really honest about that. And she was so good at like using her own lived experience with her children and with her own struggles to sort of like disarm and become really easy to talk to. And, that energy and that spirit just like, opened doors and engaged people. And I learned so much from her. Also just her ability to just listen, just really just be there. I struggle with that. Like, I'm a chatty Cathy. I love like giving my 2 cents. So I learned a lot from her about what it means to just listen and just like hold space and just, be the embodiment of like love. So that's, a big one for me.
Awesome. That holding space is that's not an easy thing to do. I'm pretty distractible. My head is usually pretty busy, and man, quieting yourself, people who are able to quiet themselves to do that with another human being, it's such a gift to offer to somebody else.
Yeah, it's tough. And also it's also about, being able to fill our cups so that we have, the bandwidth. And that's another thing Lori taught me. Like, she loved doing art, and like, she did these little paintings, and she played Minecraft on her iPad, and, she had her little things to help fill her cup so that she could show up for people in that way. And she was always asking me like, how's your self-care? And that's such an important piece, is making sure that we're taking the time we need so that we can really be there with people without having a to-do list going in our head.
Yeah. So important in our work. All right. So for the person out there who has heard this concept, harm reduction, but maybe doesn't have a really specific idea of what exactly that all means, can you give our listeners a bit of a primer? What is this concept? How is it showing up in the larger conversation around substance use disorder?
Sure. Harm reduction has been around for a long time. You read that awesome study from, I think it was the 90s. But the spirit of harm reduction, and the first harm reductionists, that we look to from our movement, started, with marginalized communities that were practicing mutual aid and self-care with each other. A lot of people don't know that, the folks who developed the acupuncture that we use still today for people in withdrawal from opioid dependency were the young lords in Harlem, young Latin men who were just like helping each other because, nobody was going in those communities helping them. And also with the women's rights movement, they really sort of capture that spirit of, with reproductive health, like just the harm reduction aspect. And then of course we have the AIDS movement, the ACT UP movement of people who nobody cared about that population. They were sick and dying, and they taught each other how to use safe supplies, how to practice safer sex, how to minimize the harm around a behavior that, they knew that wasn't going to stop just because there was an illness. Like, so we learned from them how a community can practice that radical love with each other and that mutual aid. And that is something that, I still look to today for inspiration and, as a historical reference when I'm training folks about harm reduction, because it's just really important to know where we came from. And then in terms of today, like what it looks like, I mean, one of the things that everyone is super excited about is the overdose prevention sites. Yes. There's two in New York City. We hope to have more soon throughout the state. And this concept, it just makes so much sense. They've had operational overdose prevention sites throughout the world that have been going for a long time. No one has ever died at an overdose prevention site. This is a place where folks can, use substances, have access to safer supplies like safer use supplies like fresh syringes and other things, and have someone there to revive them should they, lose consciousness from a drug poisoning with naloxone. And these places before they were overdose prevention sites, like NYRE, for example, New York Harm Reduction Educators in Harlem, this is a place where people can go regardless of their willingness to stop using or get support or go to treatment or anything. They can just walk in the door. They can have access to the supplies. They can have access to mental health or physical health care if they want. So many folks struggle with things like abscesses and they don't want to go to the hospital because they get treated so badly and they could die from that, This is a place where they can go to get those type of services, also medications. And they have a wonderful holistic health program upstairs where people do, like massage, sound healing, acupuncture, yoga, Tai Chi. And so the harm reduction centers are just places you can like walk in and get like peer support and just all these different things. But the thing that a lot of us are really trying to advocate for now is a safe supply. People need a way to use safely while they are examining their relationship with substances, because anyone that's tried to help someone that's using substances knows that telling them to stop and wanting them to stop is not going to get them to stop. We know that people stop when they feel support, when they feel connection, when they feel purpose, when they feel love and, compassion, and like they feel like a human being that's worth saving. Yeah. Then they'll take some efforts towards doing that.
Yeah. So I'm curious. So within the world of harm reduction, there are, as you said, there's the overdose prevention sites, and some would say, within the world of harm reduction or the accepted use of the medication Suboxone, things like that, moderation, that we don't always have to look at abstinence as the only way for every single human being. And I loved what you said when you started about presenting that concept to a 15-year-old, right? You can't use for the rest of your life, right? Like we just know it doesn't work. It just doesn't work, just given where kids are at developmentally at that moment. But there's another part I guess I'm curious about, and that is there an aspect of harm reduction that is also, I don't know if this is the right word, but I'll use it, that wants to somewhat normalize the use of substances?
Yes. And here's why.
Okay.
Human beings have been trying to achieve altered states through substance use since the beginning of time, to the point where we have yet to discover a civilization that did not do this ever in the history of human beings. So recognizing that substance use is common is definitely one of the principles of harm reduction. So, like just being realistic about what people do
Right.
and then taking it from there. We can't operate out of a fantasy of something that isn't true.
Yeah.
We know people are going to use substances. Look at prohibition, the failed alcohol prohibition.
Yeah.
They took away the safe supply of alcohol, and instead people died of bathtub gin. They didn't stop drinking. They continued to drink. And then you had the establishment of this crime underworld of, people gunning down each other in the streets, and, race cars were born out of that because they had to get faster, to outrun police. I mean, this is not a new story. We've been doing this cat and mouse game, since forever.
Right. So it's really, really trying to change the narrative that folks who use drugs are bad. Drug use is bad. It's all just bad, which then aids the whole other narrative, that punitive narrative that has always been it's always been in the treatment world, that folks, that those quote addicts need to be punished. And so it's really, this is bigger than just overdose prevention sites, medication. This is really looking at it on a really societally macro level.
Yes. If all people in positions of power were to come forward about their substance use, we would not have an unsafe drug supply. We would have a legal drug supply overnight, because, just because people have important positions of power or work, in a certain job doesn't mean that they don't, participate in recreational or daily substance use. So it's less about the criminalization, of the drug, and more about the recognition that it's something human beings aspire to do for various reasons, whether it's for pleasure, to medicate pain, to medicate trauma, but the shame and stigma of it is what keeps the folks that are needing help hiding in the dark and not coming forward and asking for help.
Yeah. I think I might have mentioned this to you when we spoke the other day, back to the Recovery Coach Academy. I every time I do that training, I ask the room a very specific question as we're having this conversation, again, because most of the folks in the room identify as being in recovery. And I ask all of them, do they remember a time when they were in active use where they thought to themselves, I'd really like to get help, and the only thing that stopped them from walking into a treatment agency is they knew the minute they'd walk in, they would be hit on the head with, you have to be abstinent. And Meghan, every time I ask that question, every hand in the room goes up. That stopped them
really
from
sad.
walking in.
Yeah, I can think of 1,000 examples of this, of actual, individual stories. There was someone that called me for help a few years ago who, was having problematic drinking to the point where they were like losing consciousness and were in grave danger of, dying. They lived alone, and it was really serious. They were having suicidal ideation. And this person was desperate to stop drinking, wanted to stop, abstain from alcohol. That was the goal. But what they did not want to do was stop using their prescribed anxiety medication. They wanted to keep taking that. They had been on it for like 15 years, this person, and they needed it for whatever reason. They needed it. It was prescribed. It wasn't misused. It was taken as prescribed. I could not find a treatment center in the entire Northeast that would accept this person, no matter how much money they could pay, that would help them with their alcohol use, but not force them to stop taking their anxiety meds. So you're trying to tell someone who wants to stop, this deadly combination of things that could kill them.
Right.
Well, no, you're not worth the help until you're willing to stop all of it.
Right. Which really is, you're not worth the help until you're willing to do it as we say. Right?
Yeah.
As we say. So back to, the whole meeting people where they're at, treating people as a resource, trusting people that they want to move their life forward. That's just out the window. And
not trying to go against somebody's medical professional that's been helping them for a decade, just off a 10-minute, intake call.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because I know what I've heard in my world. What are some of the criticisms out there at this moment in time of harm reduction? What some of the folks who think this is not the direction we should go in, what are they saying?
We're enabling.
Yeah.
That's the big one.
Right.
Promoting drug use. And, I said a little while ago that harm reduction attempts to normalize the fact that people do use substances. That doesn't mean I think everyone should.
Right.
Substance use is terrible for certain people, for the adolescent brain, for example, for someone with mental health. I mean, we don't condone, we don't say that everyone should use substances.
Right.
So that's a big one. And like the substituting one for another myth, which I love to push back against, because guess what? Sometimes that's a good thing.
Yeah.
If you have someone in your life that's using illicit fentanyl and is at grave danger on a daily basis of overdosing, and they want to switch to drinking a couple beers, I say that's worth celebrating. That is a good substitution.
Yes. I've got a former client who struggled with severe opioid use disorder, who is no longer using an opioid. He is not putting a needle in his arm, and I know he smokes pot a good number of times a week, and again, with all those other measures, quality of relationship, moving his life forward, holding full-time employment, all of that stuff is significantly better. Why would anybody want to argue with that?
Yeah, I wish we measured success on people's happiness scale, with themselves, their confidence scale, their connection to other people and healthy activity scale, as opposed to the, amount and types of substances they use.
Yeah. The other thing you just said that I love is the difference between normalizing substance use and promoting substance use. Two different conversations. You can normalize it and not necessarily promote it, but just as you said, recognize our history as human beings.
Yeah, I one of the most easy folks the most simple time I ever had explaining harm reduction to a group of people were these amazing nurse practitioners that I had the absolute pleasure to work with at a reproductive health clinic in Greene County, who didn't know about harm reduction, but they knew about reproductive health, and that's what they did. So to them, they're like, oh, it's like telling teenagers not to have sex. That abstinence, it's like, we get it. Okay, cool. Yep. Yeah. Can we move on? Like, it was like shocking to me. My mind was blown. I've never had such an easy time explaining these concepts to any medical professional and they just got it right away.
Yeah, it just makes sense. And to me, and I can say this as someone who's been in the field for 40 years. If we keep our mind open, then one of my criticisms of our field, and you and I talked about this the other day, is I think we have not done a really good job in our field of staying caught up on the research, of keeping our minds open. We globbed onto this model of recovery X number of generations ago, and we just keep doing it over and over and over again. And when you ask people why they do it, well, we've just always done it this way. And so to be open to, what do we understand today around even just in the world of change, of what, you've talked a little bit about good luck helping people change if you're going to hit them on the head with everything about them that's negative. How do we change that narrative, right? And know that people will move towards change when we help them see the positive in them and the strength in them.
Yeah, it seems like a common denominator of most humans, a thing that they want desperately more than almost anything else, is safety.
Yeah.
People want to feel safe. And if they don't feel safe, they're not going to make big or small changes or trust anyone, and we make people unsafe when we tell them that they're wrong or bad, for wanting to do something.
Yeah. So on that topic, in your work as a recovery coach, because this is, just one of those topics that's near and dear to my heart, you sit down with somebody in your role as a recovery coach. What are some of the ways you interact with them right from the start that speaks to the creation of trust and safety and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I really have just learned to ask good questions. That's what it comes down to. I mean, you're a trainer of motivational interviewing, and that's that's, something I rely on heavily, is just asking good questions and not coming across like I'm using something straight out of a training. I really do come from a place of curiosity.
Yep.
I lead with curiosity. I try, from the bottom of my heart to really just understand them. And that's another thing people really want, is to be understood and listened to. And I just focus on holding that space. I try not to get really far ahead of anything and just be present with people, leading with curiosity, asking good questions, and trying to understand, what they want. If they want to tell me their life story, I'm there to hear it. If they don't, that's fine too. But just recognizing that everybody's goals, dreams, hopes, wants are so, so different. I always joke around and say, like, my idea of a perfect day might be somebody else's nightmare, so just discovering and being curious and really genuinely like wanting to know more about a person and what they want is really the only way to lead with people.
Yeah. And I would imagine, I know have had this experience in my work as a recovery coach. You practice what you just described with somebody who, before they come to you, has interacted with some of the more traditional corners of the treatment world, and sometimes they don't even know what to make of it.
It's true.
I often I talk with my clients very quickly about the concept of autonomy, which you're talking about, which is, this is your conversation, this is your life. And when I talk with them about what that means in our work, part of which is, I'm never going to tell you what to do, because most days I can barely keep my shit together as a human being. I've had clients turn to me and say, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you're not eventually going to tell me what to do, because that's what you guys do. You guys, the treatment world.
Yeah.
So it's so powerful when you present in the way you described.
Yeah. And having, there's some tools I find really helpful too. Like, I usually carry around fentanyl test strips, naloxone. When I can, I try to have safer use supplies on me, because that physical tool of like offering, a thing to someone that could potentially help them also was very transformative, because you're showing them, that you really are coming from a place of just wanting them to be safe. All right, I get it. You're still using. Have you ever tested your drugs? Here's how to use this thing. Are you using clean syringes? Do you need to hook up with syringe exchange? Like, are you using a loan? That's no good. There's an unsafe supply out there. You got to call this number, never ever use a loan. So when I shift the conversation from, hey, you really should go to treatment today, right? Let's go to detox. Come on, let's just go right now. That's what they're so used to. So when I lead with like, these concerns of safety, this education of like how to stay safer, this resource sharing, it really does lead off on a better foot.
Oh, right. It also, as you know, it also honors stages of change. It just honors when I'm in front of pre-contemplation or contemplation or even preparation. That's not a person who's ready to pick up the phone and call and make an appointment at a treatment agency. So how do I, once again, I know we're sounding like a broken record here, meet them where they're at?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. The other part is, I'm listening to you, and it some combination of just so angry and sad for me is when you get pushback from people about what you were just describing, of the steps we can do to just help people stay safe and alive, and stop demonizing the substance use or the narrative that, they get what they deserve, right? If they're going to use substances.
They must not want it bad enough.
They must not want it bad enough. Right. Oh, just drives me crazy.
It's tough.
Because here we are, we're the helping world. And we, you and I have brothers and sisters in the helping world who still push that narrative that, you just haven't hit bottom. You don't want it bad enough. You're not working a hard enough program, blah, 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 blah. Oh, drives me nuts. The
thing I hear more and more now, which is a small win, I guess, is more acceptance around cannabis use, especially if it's like prescribed from the dispensary. So a lot of people, when I'm having this conversation with them, will lead with like, I get it. If someone wants to use like prescribed cannabis from the dispensary, all right, cool. But like, that's different than, enabling them to use heroin.
Yeah. Yes. It's crazy. So let me ask you a couple of questions, because I'm looking at the clock. We're already 45 minutes in. which simply means you and I are going to have another conversation somewhere down the road because
nice.
an hour is not enough time. So you talked a little bit about what brought you to this work. And I'm always curious with people if there is any difference between what brought you to the work versus what keeps you in the work today.
Yeah, that's a good one. And to be honest, I did come in with like this like savior complex,
Right.
that we hear about, like thinking like I'm going to, save lives and keep people alive and, do something instead of sitting back and watching. And I don't do that anymore. I have people all the time in my life, family that like thank me for what I do. And, and now I don't see myself as like the savior anymore.
Yeah.
I do see myself more as just like, another person that is adding the strength of the front line of this like really important movement. So I see myself more as like part of a bigger whole now,
Right.
instead of like this, person that's going to pull people out of the river or whatever. Yeah. I've definitely changed in that way.
Yeah. I relate to that. Look, this is a very general statement, but I do have a belief that most of us come to the helping professions for not always the healthiest of reasons.
Oh yeah.
Right. And it's usually us working through our own stuff, which again, at the end of the day, I don't argue with, because that tends to be what brings really caring and compassionate and passionate people to the helping world. But I do believe somewhere that motivation has to flip, or you probably won't last really long in the helping world, to something not so about you, I guess, right, is how I think about it. Yeah, very much so. Okay, so if you had the opportunity to spend some time with one or two or three people in the helping world, people you look up to, and these could be people who are alive, these could be people who have passed, these could be famous helping people, you and I have never met, who would be on that list that you think it would just be really cool to have some conversation with about this work that we do?
So I've been thinking about this, and I thought of some folks that were still on this earth that I really look up to, that I admire and are just huge fans of their work. But to be honest, like when I think about helpers that, if I had to just choose a couple to like spend time with, I think about folks like Thich Nhat Hanh, that just passed away, a Buddhist monk. Right. Who like his teachings and his existence in this world has made such an impact on me and my work, and the simplicity of it, I think is something that was just really transformational. His commitment to social justice, like he used to meet with Martin Luther King, and like just like from the beginning to the end of his life, was just like dedicated to ending the suffering of humanity, full stop. Like that was it, and so that's somebody that I wish I had gotten to spend time with, who recently left this life, that I was thinking about, that I would choose. And then the other person, so this is like a little outside the box and not someone that like traditionally you would see as a helper. But there's a science fiction writer named Octavia Butler that I'm just like a huge fan of. I'm not alone. She has like a cult following. And it's funny because I meet so many people in this movement, in the harm reduction movement, who are also like obsessed with Octavia Butler. And when you look to the why, she wrote about survival, like surviving apocalypses with radical compassion, honoring our humanity, radical love, and just like using creativity and the power of love to save humanity. And if not that, then what, and so I think that even though she hasn't been here for a while, that she's someone that a lot of people in this work really look to for wisdom and for an escape. Something I really wanted to change about my unhealthy habits a couple of years ago was like doom scrolling on my phone in bed at night before bed. And I actually heard a podcast that was called How to Read More. And I was like, oh, all right. So I did this thing anyway. The point is now before bed, I read sci-fi because I just want to go away and escape. And I can open a book, by Octavia Butler or some others, and just really imagine a world that is still full of pain, is still full of injustice, but has humanity intact, has radical love intact, and has the principles that I need as my like North Star to guide me through kind of this world we're in. So I'm really grateful for her contribution.
That's awesome. You and I have that in common. Science fiction is my favorite genre.
Nice.
And for what the reasons you're saying, it is, for me, it is so easy to get lost in it. It's so easy when one of my favorite authors is Stephen Baxter. And, when you read about his vision of a world far away 3,000 years from now, there's even a part of it for me that gives me a sense of hope that, maybe us humans are going to be around in the future. But yes, yeah.
Hope. We need that. We need hope.
Yes. Oh, my Lord. Especially now, we really, really do. So yes, we share that. That is my favorite genre. What would you say right now in your work? Actually, before I even ask this question, I want to make sure we have the time. Can you talk a little bit about who you're working for right now and what you're doing out there in the harm reduction world?
Sure. So my full-time job is for a tech company, which I never thought I'd be saying those words ever in a million years, because I am not a tech person. I needed help from my partner to even set up the mics and stuff to do this interview. But I'm doing digital peer support, which I'm really excited about it, because I think this is the direction things are going in a lot of ways. We use contingency management, which is a tried and true evidence-based, harm reduction method of rewarding people with prizes in the form of gift cards for reaching their own goals, not the goals I have for them. So we partner with people, come up with a plan, and they check into, the things that are going to help them, whether it's a doctor's appointment, yoga, a meeting, whatever, and they get rewarded with gift cards. We also host 8 online recovery meetings a day, a harm reduction meeting, and we provide support for anything, someone's substance use, mental health, it depends on what the person wants to work on. So that's, I get to do that. And it's really, really cool. I do enjoy volunteering as much as possible, to do more direct services, street level outreach through some really awesome organizations like Vocal New York or Next Distro, just to get out there and meet people where they're at again. But for the most part, I'm in this digital space now.
That's awesome. Look, that's where everyone is at, right? You talk about a change we probably wouldn't have seen, 10, 15 years ago, but it's where people live. And so honoring that, let's meet where they're at. Makes so much sense.
There's so many creative solutions around Next Distro. I mean, this is a mail order harm reduction supply. That is it. That's all they do is send people stuff in the mail to their homes confidentially, with a handwritten note in it. You matter, you're worth it. Keep going. Awesome. We care about you. I mean, oh my gosh, it just gives me the chills that somebody can be isolated, but still receive that support in the form of actual things, but also just the encouragement. Yeah.
So in that vein, if someone is listening today and would love to experience just be in some conversation around harm reduction, whether it's a harm reduction meeting, things like that, maybe a recommendation or two of where somebody might go looking online to find some of that information.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked, because I can't believe I made it 55 minutes without talking once about Harm Reduction Works, which is I'm so excited about and so passionate about. It's a brand new mutual aid support group that meets with a script, just like other mutual aid support groups. It's scripted. There's a host that reads a script. There's either a speaker or some other type of exercise, and then the meeting opens up and people can, give and receive support for their goal process, whatever that looks like. We welcome people practicing abstinence. It's not required, but it's welcome. And people come there and just shed the stigma and shame, get honest with themselves. It's a beautiful thing. And those meetings are abundant now online, virtually. Yeah. I'm actually hosting a meeting in 45 minutes after this, 1 p.m. every Friday. through We Connect Health Management, through the website. You can click and attend that meeting. Anyone is welcome, even if you're just like, I want to learn more about this harm reduction thing.
Right.
You can come. There are closed meetings, like just for people who are currently using, but a lot of the meetings are open. There's also specialty meetings for parents and family members that want to learn more about harm reduction. And those meetings are really inspiring to see these parents hold each other accountable for like going backwards and doing the shame thing again, the tough love thing again, and there's like BIPOC meetings, there's women meetings, there's LGBTQ, like Harm Reduction Works has just exploded over Zoom. There are in-person meetings as well in different areas too. So that's awesome. Harmreduction.works is where you can find more info.
And I will make sure that in the notes for this podcast episode, we'll have all of those links available for folks, so they can go out there and find out more information on this literally life-saving concept. If you had the opportunity, Meghan, to get up in front of an auditorium full of folks, our brothers and sisters who are working in the treatment and recovery world, what would your message be to them around this concept of harm reduction?
My message to them would be, to change their thinking from finding the fault in someone's wellness, someone's plan, and instead meeting them with, you're not doing it wrong. You're trying. Yeah. Change is hard. Yeah. Incremental change is worth celebrating. We don't have to change everything all at once. Like small victories are worth celebrating.
Yeah. Beautiful. Boy, is that needed. So needed. So, you've given us some indication of this, but let me ask, right now in your work, what would you say is the most challenging aspect of your work?
This is my first time doing digital support. I mean, I've been at it for a couple of years now, but I used to be like in hospitals and the emergency room, action, like out in the street meeting people. And now I'm mostly interacting through a screen. Right. And I think that there's challenges on both ends. I have challenges with it. And the folks on the other end, I think at times might be missing that human connection piece. Yeah. So although I'm excited about the digital world, I think that's where I face the challenges is like, that interaction in real life, that human connection.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think, especially during these last 2+ years, thank God for the digital world and thank God for Zoom, but it is not the same. Not quite the same as the energy of being in the room with another human being.
Yeah. And the other challenge, I know you only asked for one, but I thought of one that I couldn't, not say, is the systems like you've been bringing up the whole time, the systems that we have to partner with. Cause I'm not a treatment professional. I'm not a therapist. I'm not inpatient. So I do occasionally have to send people for professional medical help and that's where there's a lot of challenges, a lot of work to be done.
Oh my. And look, when I talk about the treatment and recovery industry, treatment and recovery world, it's not just the treatment programs, it's probation, it's drug court, right? It's all these systems that still, while they're moving, I want to give them some credit, they're moving in some good directions. They are still so entrenched in the punitive narrative around substance use and those that use substances, and it's. I am not inherently the most patient person in the world, and watching change happen so slowly around concepts that make so much sense to me, it's frustrating at times.
Yeah, it's funny when you tell someone that doesn't work in our field about this, it's almost like common sense. They just kind of get it.
Right. Right. Oh, keep people alive? Yeah, I get that. I can wrap my head around that.
Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful that you're willing to have these public conversations about something that's a little taboo, because we do need to disrupt things. The systems are in desperate need of change. And, these conversations are incredibly helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you say when we started out an hour ago? What's on the T-shirt you mentioned?
Harm reductionists have the courage to be disliked.
Oh, I got to find out where to get one of those. Right? Yeah. That definitely makes sense. Last question. At the end of the day, what brings you the most joy in doing this work?
Oh my gosh, it's got to be that moment where the person forgives themselves for not being perfect.
Yeah.
Like the moment where they are given permission to be where they're at and not have to feel, bad about it anymore.
Yeah. That is a huge moment, and again, such a gift to people, maybe especially people who've walked in some of the traditional corners of our treatment and recovery world and haven't gotten that message. Just haven't. Yeah.
It's why I say the words radical compassion. I say them so many times. My mom wasn't very pleased, but it was the first tattoo I had gotten since I was 18 years old recently, because it just really is the solution to me for almost anything.
Yes. Yeah. Right. That's it. So simple, and yet it seems to be very difficult for some parts of humanity to act on, right? Meghan Hetfield, thank you so much for making the time in your, I know, very busy and meaningful schedule to be in this conversation with us. And again, I'm gonna find you maybe, a few months down the road, a year down the road, and see where this conversation is at, because we need to make sure that it continues to move forward. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate you.
You're welcome. And I will make sure that we have Meghan's contact information and some of the links that she talked about for some of the organizations in the description for the podcast. I also trust that hopefully you and I will maybe see each other in October at the New York State Recovery Conference, because
I think you might.
If it's live, I plan on being there this year.
Awesome.
I'm hoping it will be. So again, thank you so much. I thank you all for listening today, and I hope you found the conversation with Meghan worth your time and deeply meaningful, and especially if you are somebody who is struggling with substance use disorder, loves somebody who is struggling with substance use disorder. I hope this conversation made some sense and maybe even gave you a little bit more of a sense of hope that there are other ways to be in this conversation with people that honor human beings, honor the complexity of change, and honor that the greatest gift we give as helping people when we walk in a room with somebody is to believe that when we walk into the room with the person we are there to help, that the answer is already in the room, and we, the helping person, doesn't have it. The other person has it, and we need to, as Meghan said, ask good questions, practice radical love and acceptance, and be patient. And listen deeply, and help the person hear the answer that is in there, even at a moment when they don't think they have it, and allow them to define it. That really is it. It's just wonderful conversation, and we need lots of people to be pushing this through the recovery and treatment world right now. So a big thank you to Meghan for being with us. I hope you make the time to join us again on the next episode of the Helping Conversation, as we continue to shine a light on the skill and talent of those individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the Helping Conversation. Everybody have a good day.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the Helping Conversation.